The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House will be shocked by the appalling news that 39 bodies have been discovered in a lorry container in Essex. This is an unimaginable tragedy and truly heartbreaking. I know that the thoughts and prayers of all members are with those who lost their lives and their loved ones. I'm receiving regular updates, and the Home Office will work closely with Essex Police as we establish exactly what has happened. And my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will be making an oral statement immediately after these questions. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. Rupa Haque.
Mr. Speaker, can I completely associate myself with the remarks the Prime Minister made about the tragedy in Essex? I don't normally do that, but on this occasion I completely am with him. Good to see the PM at PMQs. In nearly 100 days, I think until today, he'd only ever done one. The Prime Minister has, we all know, a long list of shortcomings. So could he do something? So please, could he do something about one that he does have some control of, and get rid of Dominic Cummings?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think I'll try to reply with the generosity of spirit that she would expect from me, and just say that I receive excellent advice from a wide range of advisors and officials, and it is the role of advisors to advise and of government to decide, and I take full responsibility for everything that this government does.
My right honourable friend achieved what many said was impossible and negotiated a new Brexit deal which passed through this House last night. Does the Prime Minister share my regret that many in the party opposite, including the Leader of the Opposition, voted to delay us leaving with a deal on October the 31st once again? Not least after what he said in this House on the 22nd of February 2016, that his party welcomed the fact that it is now up to the British people to decide whether we remain in the European Union.
My right honourable friend, as so often, speaks with complete good sense, and I do think it was a remarkable thing that so many members of the House were able to come together last night and approve the second reading of the bill. I think it was a great shame that the House, as it were, willed the end, Mr. Speaker, but not the means. But there is still time for the right honourable gentleman to do that and to explain to the people of this country how he proposes to honour his promise that he made repeatedly and deliver on the will of the people and get Brexit done. Because and perhaps, Mr. Speaker, he will enlighten us now.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join others who have offered their deep sadness at today's news of 39 people being found dead in a lorry container in Grays. Can we just think for a moment of what it must have been like for those 39 people, obviously in a desperate and dangerous situation, for their lives to end, suffocated to death in a container. This is an unbelievable human tragedy that happened in our country at this time. We obviously need to look at the whole situation and answers to what has happened there. But also, I do pay an enormous tribute to the emergency services who've gone to the scene to deal with it. All of us should just think for a moment what it's like to be a police officer or a firefighter, to open that container and have to remove 39 bodies from it and deal with them in an appropriate and humane way. We should just think for a moment of what inhumanity is done to other human beings at this terrible moment. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, before the Prime Minister decided to delay his own withdrawal bill, he promised to maintain... Let me finish. Decided to delay his own withdrawal bill. If you care to look at Hansard, you'll see what it says. he promised to maintain environmental, consumer and workers' rights. Why then did the Prime Minister have these commitments removed from the legally binding withdrawal agreement?
Mr. Speaker, I don't think we could have been clearer yesterday in our commitment to have the highest possible standards for workers' rights, for environmental standards, and indeed I think one of the things that brought the House together was the knowledge that as we go forward and build our future partnership with the EU, it will always be open to members on all sides of the House to work together to ensure that whatever the EU comes up with, we can match and pass into the law of this country. And that, I think, commanded a lot of support and a lot of assent across the House. And I must say I find it peculiar that he now wants this bill back, because he voted against it last night, and he whipped his entire Labour Party against it. And I think it was a remarkable thing that the House successfully defied his urgings and approved that deal. What I think we would like to hear from him now is his commitment to getting Brexit done. That is what the public want to hear. And I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, they are worried that all he wants is a second referendum.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The Prime Minister doesn't answer the question I put to him, which was about environmental, consumer and workers' rights. And I'm not surprised because I'm not surprised, Mr. Speaker, because he once said employment regulation was backbreaking, and he voted for the 2016 Anti-Trade Union Act, which stripped away employment protections, and the provisions in the bill offer no real protection at all. Yesterday, in the Withdrawal Agreement Bill debate, the Prime Minister pledged that the NHS was safe in his hands. If that's the case, will he be backing our amendment today, which would undo the very damaging privatisation so much of our NHS?
Mr. Speaker, I think I must say he's showing complete ignoratio elenchi, as you'd say, complete failure to study what we actually passed last night in that historic agreement. It is very, very clear that it is open to this House to do better where it chooses on animal welfare standards or on social protection, as indeed this country very often does. We lead the way. We are a groundbreaker. We are a groundbreaker, Mr. Speaker. We are a groundbreaker in this country, and I'm afraid to say that the Right Honourable Gentleman has no other purpose in seeking to frustrate Brexit than to cause a second referendum. As for the NHS, Mr. Speaker, as for the NHS, this is the party whose sound management of the economy took this country back from the abyss and enabled us to spend another £34 billion on the NHS, a record investment, and Mr. Speaker, as I promised on the steps of Downing Street, to begin the upgrade of 20 hospitals, and as a result of the commitments this country is making, this government is making, 40 new hospitals, Mr. Speaker, will be built in the next 10 years. That is this party's commitment to the NHS.
Order, Mr. Russell-Moyle, you are an incorrigible individual. Yelling from a sedentary position at the top of your voice at every turn. Calm yourself, man. Take some sort of soothing medicament from which you will benefit. Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 questions, and we're still waiting for an answer. Although we could do with a translation of the first part of his response. I hate to break it to the Prime Minister, but under his government and that of his predecessor, privatisation has more than doubled to £10 billion in our NHS. There are currently 20 NHS contracts out to tender, and when he promised 40 hospitals, he then reduced that to 20, and then it turns out that reconfiguration is taking place in just 6 hospitals. And so these numbers keep tumbling down of his unfunded spending commitments that he liberally makes around the country. The Prime Minister continues to say that he will He continues to say, well, he will exclude our NHS from being up for grabs in future trade deals. Can he point to which clause in the withdrawal agreement bill secures that?
Mr. Speaker, I must say to him that he is completely wrong in what he says about privatisation of the NHS, and I must resist this, because those 40 new hospitals, those 47,000 extra clinical staff, including 17,000 nurses, they weren't paid for out of private funds, Mr. Speaker. They were paid for by the NHS. The reason we're able to pay for them is because this party and this government believes in sound management of the economy, not recklessly putting up corporation tax, not recklessly wrecking the economy in the way that, renationalising companies in the way that he would do. And he asks about the NHS in any future free trade deal, and I understand his visceral dislike of America and his visceral dislike, and I understand his visceral dislike of free trade.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Now, Mr. Speaker, I actually asked the Prime Minister which clause in the bill protects our NHS, and obviously there's time for him to help us with an answer on that. He should also be aware that there's no public capital allocations made for the funding commitments that he's announced. All he said is there's seed funding. I'm not sure what seed funding is, but it doesn't sound like the commitment that we were seeking, and it sounds awfully like private finance going into the NHS in order to deal with the issues it faces. Mr. Speaker, less than 1 year ago, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, that any regulatory checks and custom controls between Great Britain and Northern Ireland would damage the fabric of the Union. Given that this deal clearly does damage the fabric of the Union, does he still agree with himself?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that, and I know that this was raised many times in the House yesterday, I believe that the Union is preserved, and indeed we are able to go forward together as one United Kingdom and do free trade deals in a way that would have been impossible under previous deals. This is a great advance for the whole of the UK, and we intend to develop that together with our friends in Northern Ireland. But I must say to the right honourable gentleman, and indeed his colleagues on the front bench, that I think it's a bit rich, Mr. Speaker, to hear from him about his sentimental attachment to the fabric of the union between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, when he has spent most of his political lifetime supporting the IRA and those who would destroy it by violence.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has a habit of not answering any questions that's put to him. Northern Ireland will remain on single market rules within the EU on goods and agricultural products. The rest of the UK will not. As the Honourable Member for East Antrim pointed out yesterday, it does create a very real border down the Irish Sea, something he said in terms to a DUP conference he would never do. And it wasn't that long ago. It may be when he was trying to become the Tory party leader that he said that. The Prime Minister told the House on Saturday there would be no checks on goods moving between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Yet yesterday, the Brexit Secretary confirmed to the Lords European Union Committee that Northern Irish businesses sending goods to Britain would have to complete export declaration forms. Is the Prime Minister right on this, or is the Brexit Secretary right on this? They can't both be right.
Mr. Speaker, let's be absolutely clear that the United Kingdom is preserved whole and entire by these arrangements, and indeed the whole of the UK will be allowed to come out of the European Union customs union so that we can do free trade deals together. There will be no checks between Northern Ireland and GB, and there will be no tariffs. There will be no tariffs between Northern Ireland and there will be no tariffs between Northern Ireland and GB, because we have protected the customs union. And I may say, Mr. Speaker, this lachrymose defence of the Union, as I say, comes a little ill from somebody who not only campaigned to break up the union between Great Britain and Northern Ireland by his support of the IRA, but who also, Mr. Speaker, wants to spend the whole of the next year in a referendum not just on the EU, but another referendum on Scotland, Mr. Speaker. That's what he wants. This is a threat to our United Kingdom on the Labour front bench.
Mr. Speaker, I really do wonder if the Prime Minister has read Clause 21 of his own bill. The Good Friday Agreement was one of the greatest achievements of this House, led by a Labour government at that time. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister unlawfully prorogued Parliament. He said he would refuse to comply with the law. He threw Northern Ireland under a bus. He ripped up protections for workers' rights and environmental standards, lost every vote along the way, and tried to prevent genuine democratic scrutiny and debate. He once said the whole withdrawal bill, as signed by the previous Prime Minister, is a terrible treaty. And yet this deal is even worse than that. Even if he's not that familiar with it, does the Prime Minister accept that Parliament should have the necessary time to improve on this worse than terrible treaty?
Mr. Speaker, it is this government and this party that delivers on the mandate of the people. And I listened carefully to what the right honourable gentleman just said, but he said it before, Mr. Speaker. They said that we couldn't open the withdrawal agreement, and we did. They said we couldn't get rid of the backstop, and we did. They said we couldn't get a new deal, Mr. Speaker, and we did. And then they said that we'd never get it through Parliament, and they did their utmost, didn't they? They did their utmost to stop it going through Parliament. And we got it through Parliament last night, Mr. Speaker. And this is the party and this is the government. This is the party and this is the government that delivers on its promises. We said we would put 20,000 more police officers on the streets of this country, and we are. We said we'd upgrade 20 hospitals, and we are. We said we'd uplift education funding around the whole country, and even more than that, Mr. Speaker, we are increasing the minimum wage, increasing the living wage by the biggest amount since its inception. This is the party, Mr. Speaker, that delivers on Brexit and delivers on the priorities of the British people.
Order. There will be more of that, colleagues can be entirely assured. Closed question, Martin Vickers.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker. Well done.
Mr. Speaker, we will invest in infrastructure in every corner of the UK, including £13 billion on transport in the north of the country.
Martin Vickers.
I thank my right honourable friend for his reply. One thing that would encourage investment in northern Lincolnshire and boost the local economy is Freeport status for the Humber ports, and improved access to those ports by an upgrade to the A15 between Lincoln and the A180 and improved east-west rail freight connections. Could my right honourable friend confirm support for those proposals?
I can indeed, Mr. Speaker, confirm support for those proposals, and I well remember meeting my honourable friend and his constituents in the corridor, I think in Portcullis House, when they raised with me, in addition, the issue of the crossing of the railway line at Suggett's Lane, Mr. Speaker. And I wish to assure my honourable friend that Suggett's Lane is never far from my thoughts, and I have undertakings from the Department of Transport that they will seek to find a solution, a safe means for pedestrians to cross the railway line at Suggett's Lane, in addition to the other pledges I've made to him today.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The loss of life that we've learned about this morning in Essex, 39 people that have been taken from this earth, should distress us all. And the fact that this should happen in the United Kingdom we need to dwell on, that people put themselves in such situation in the search of a better life. And we must not just brush this off as an incident. We have to learn the lessons as to why this has happened. Our thoughts and prayers must be with everyone, and those from the emergency services that have had to avail themselves of this most shocking sight this morning. We must not just have warm words today, and that's the end of it. As a humanity, we must learn from this terrible, terrible tragedy. Mr. Speaker, within the last hour, the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales joined forces to oppose the Tory government's damaging Brexit bill. A bill that risks jobs, opportunities and our entire economic future. Mr. Speaker, Scotland did not vote for this toxic Tory Brexit or any Brexit. It voted overwhelmingly to remain. Will the Prime Minister stop ignoring Scotland and confirm today that he will not allow this legislation to pass unless consent is given by the Scottish Parliament? Yes or no, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I note very carefully what the Right Honourable Gentleman had to say, but as he knows, the Scottish Parliament has no role in approving this deal. On the contrary, it is up to the people of this, up to the members of this Parliament to approve the deal. I'm delighted to say that they did. It didn't proceed, I think, with the support of many Scottish nationalist MPs, or any of them. But if he really still disagrees with this deal and he disagrees about the way forward, then can I propose to him that he has a word with other opposition parties and he joins our support for a general election to settle the matter.
Ian Blackford.
Well, there we have it, Mr. Speaker. The legislative consent that the Scottish Parliament is asked is meaningless in the Prime Minister's eyes. So much for the respect agenda, so much for the message in 2014 that we were to lead the United Kingdom, that this was a union of equals, torn asunder by the disrespect of this Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, well, they don't like the truth, but the people of Scotland have heard it from the Prime Minister today. Our Parliament doesn't matter. That's what this Prime Minister thinks of our government in Scotland. Mr. Speaker, last night the Prime Minister was yet again defeated by this House. The Prime Minister said he would pull his bill. He hasn't. He wants Scotland to trust him, but how can we? Fired twice for lying. Found unlawful by the courts. The Prime Minister has sold Scotland out time and time again. Parliament, Scotland, cannot trust this Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister so desperately wants an election, Europe is willing and waiting. What's stopping him? He must now secure a meaningful extension and bring on a general election. Let the Scottish people decide our future in Scotland.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what an exciting development. Perhaps he might pass some of his courage down the line. But on the point that he raises, Mr. Speaker, about our commitment to the Union, he should know that thanks to Scotland's membership of the Union, Scotland this year receives the biggest ever block grant, 1.2 billion, 200 million more secured for Scottish farming, thanks to the hard work of Scottish Conservative MPs, Mr. Speaker. And who is letting down Scotland? It is the SNP with their lackadaisical government, the highest taxes anywhere in the UK, declining educational standards, inadequate healthcare, and a European policy, a policy that would take the Scotland back into the EU and hand back control of Scotland's fish to Brussels. If that's their manifesto, Mr. Speaker, then I look forward to contesting it with them at the polls.
Sir David Amis.
When my right honourable friend was seeking to become leader of the Conservative Party, I was possibly the only one of our colleagues who asked him for anything in return for their support. I'm being charitable. I asked him for 3 things. 1, that he would get Brexit done. 2, that he would make me a duke because my wife fancies becoming a duchess. And finally, something that the Leader of the Opposition certainly agrees with me, that Southend becomes a city. When will these things happen?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and grateful to him, by the way, for his support, I may say. But I can say to him that our policy remains unchanged, that we should leave the EU on October the 31st, at the end of this month. Well, we will leave the EU on October the 31st if we can make that, if our honourable members opposite will comply. And that is what I will say to the EU, and I will report back to the House in due course. On my honourable friend's other 2 requests of a dukedom, a duchess and a city, can I undertake, Mr. Speaker, through your order, to report back to the House on the progress that we're making.
Mr. Barry Shearman.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Prime Minister has seen the heartbreaking images of children being killed, mutilated, seriously injured on the Syrian border. And will he, given that the Turks are members of NATO and old allies of ours, we fought with the Kurds, they're good and trusted friends, and the United States is a major ally of ours, and he has a good relationship with Donald Trump. Will he step up to the plate and show that the British government cares about this and is willing to do something about it?
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman, and he's absolutely right to raise this issue. And if I may say so, it is an appalling state of affairs, and the House will be aware of what is happening in northern Syria. This is something that the British government has actively deplored, and I have spoken to President Erdogan twice now, I think, both last weekend and this most recent weekend, on the matter, and urged him to cease fire, urged for a standstill, and everybody, I think, in the House shares the right honourable gentleman's feelings about the loss of civilian life. It is particularly unsettling to see some of our close allies at variance in this matter. So the UK is working very closely now, as he would expect, with our French and German friends, to try to bring an understanding to President Erdogan of the risks that we think this policy is running, and, of course, to persuade our American friends that we cannot simply turn a blind eye to what is happening in Syria. And he is entirely correct in what he says.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
I'm grateful for the comments made by members about the tragic events that have been unfolded in my constituency this morning. To put 39 people into a locked metal container shows a contempt for human life that is evil. And the best thing we can do in memory of those victims is to find the perpetrators and bring them to justice. But would my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to all those who attended the scene this morning that showed incredible leadership and professionalism? And let's remember, the scenes they witnessed will stay with them forever.
Prime Minister.
I entirely agree with what my honourable friend has said, and indeed what other colleagues already in this chamber have said today. It is hard to put ourselves in the shoes of those emergency services, as the right honourable gentleman opposite said, as they were asked to open that container and to expose the appalling crime that had taken place. And I must say, I do share her strong desire now that the perpetrators of that crime, and indeed all those who engage in similar activity, because we know that this trade is going on, all such traders in human beings should be hunted down and brought to justice.
Brendan O'Hara.
Mr. Speaker. In a dispute, diametrically opposing outcomes cannot be equally beneficial for both sides. So if the Prime Minister's great deal is so good for Northern Ireland seafood producers, allowing them access to the single market and the customs union, how would he describe his deal for the shellfish producers of my Argyll and Bute constituency, who fish in the same waters for exactly the same catch, but do not have access to the single market and the customs union? One has a great deal. What does the other one have?
Mr. Speaker, that I can tell that the honourable gentleman that, of course, the fishing communities of Scotland have a fantastic opportunity by the end of next year to take back control of their entire coastal waters, all 200 miles, and to manage their fisheries in the interests of Scotland, and thereby to drive, if I may say so, an even better deal for even better access to European markets. And that is an opportunity that will be wantonly thrown away, Mr. Speaker, by the abject, servile policy of the SNP, who would hand back control of Scottish fishing to Brussels.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday my right honourable friend achieved the first landmark of his premiership by getting this House to vote by a comfortable majority in favour of Brexit. If he now proceeds in the reasonable and statesmanlike way I would hope for, then he can go on in a month or two's time to actually deliver Brexit before having a general election on the sensible basis of a mandate for a government on the fuller negotiations that will follow. So will my right honourable friend firstly get over his disappointment and accept that October the 31st is now Halloween, it is devoid of any symbolic or political content and will fade away into historical memory very rapidly. So will he, having reflected, let us know that he's about to table a reasonable timetable motion so that this House can complete the task of finalising the details of the withdrawal bill so we can move on a basis which might begin to reunite the nation once again for the future.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend makes a very reasonable case. Alas, we cannot now know what the EU will do in response to the request from Parliament. I stress it wasn't my request, but a request from Parliament to ask for a delay. We are awaiting, Mr. Speaker, their reaction to Parliament's request for a delay. I think myself, I must respectfully disagree with my right honourable friend, perhaps not for the first time. I think it would still be very much in the best interest of this country and of democracy to get Brexit done by October the 31st. I will wait to see what our EU friends and partners say in response both to the request for a delay from Parliament and also to the insistence by Parliament that they want a delay. I don't think the people of this country want a delay. I don't want a delay. I intend to press on, but I'm afraid we now have to see what our EU friends will decide on our behalf, and that is the result of the decision that he took last night.
Jonathan Reynolds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The National Farmers Union reported this week that 16 million apples have rotted away because the immigrant workers that normally pick those for the country have chosen not to come. Now, immigration was clearly a big part of the EU referendum, and the Prime Minister has promised a points-based system, but that isn't going to allow for people coming here to pick fruit. So what does the Prime Minister intend to do to stop the scandal of British food rotting away in the fields?
Well, Mr. Speaker, to the best of my knowledge, there are more EU nationals living and working in this country than ever before, and that's in many ways a great thing. But we have, as he knows, the EU settlement scheme, national settlement scheme, to encourage people to come forward and register if they're in any doubt about their status. But also, we will be bringing forward an Australian-style points-based immigration system to make sure that all sectors have access to the labour they need.
Penny Mordaunt.
Speaker, can I congratulate the Prime Minister on achieving so many things that the establishment said were impossible? In light of that, could I ask him to instruct the Cabinet Office to examine how we can bring an end to male primogeniture and the ridiculous rules in the honours system which value women less than men, hopefully before he makes good on his undertakings to my honourable friend, the member for Southend-on-Sea?
Mr. Speaker, speaking as the oldest son who's never seen any particular benefits from that, I understand completely what she says. I will reflect on her request, and I think she speaks for many people around the country in wishing to see fairness and equality in the way we do these things.
Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are families across the United Kingdom that have children suffering from epilepsy. Many have found that medical cannabis is a great help, but they've been driven to either act unlawfully or paid huge sums of money to gain access to medical cannabis. The Secretary of State for Health stated on the 19th of March that in several months' time it will be made available. Endor Payne wrote to the Prime Minister on the 19th of September and is still to receive an answer. When will the Prime Minister take the necessary actions required to ensure those children can access medical cannabis legally and at no cost?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I understand the desperate difficulties that people who require the medical use of cannabis are going through, and of course it is, I think, right that we have changed the way we do things. The Chief Medical Officer and NHS England have made it clear that cannabis-based products can be prescribed for medicinal use. I think it must be up to doctors to decide when it is in the best interest of their patients to do so. But can I invite him, since I can tell that my answer is not satisfying, can I invite him I will take it up personally with him and also with the Secretary of State for Health so that he gets the satisfaction that he needs, and more importantly that his constituent gets the reassurance that they need.
Sir Alan Duncan.
Mr. Speaker, when a high-profile person has been wrongly accused of a sexual crime and has had his livelihood and reputation destroyed, following which the police, it seems, would rather fight him in court than compensate him, might the Prime Minister consider making it clear to the police that it's their duty to address injustice rather than create and perpetuate it, and that they should pay compensation rather than waste taxpayers' money on malicious litigation designed to avoid doing so?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I completely agree with that. There is obviously a very difficult balance to be struck, because clearly we do not wish in any way to discourage the police from investigating and prosecuting offences wherever they may be, no matter how high the people in office may be. But nonetheless, where they do get it wrong, and where they have manifestly got it wrong, then there should be a duty upon the police not just to apologise but also to make amends.
Jim Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When is the Prime Minister going to sort out the difference between the BBC and the government in relation to his manifesto commitment in the last general election to implement free television licences for the over 75? When is something going to be done about it?
Mr. Speaker, it is up to the BBC has the funds, as the honourable gentleman knows full well. It is there, and they should be funding those free TV licences. And we continue to make that argument very vigorously with the BBC. And believe me, he asked me to put the screws on the BBC. We certainly will.
Lucy Allen.
Mr. Speaker, Telford needs its A&E and its Women and Children's Centre. It's a town that will have a population of 200,000 people within the next 10 years. A new town, a former mining town, with pockets of deprivation and poor health outcomes. And while funding is being pumped into the affluent county town of Shrewsbury, some 20 miles away, Telford is losing vital services. Will my right honourable friend reverse the decision of the Health Secretary to approve this plan, and will he urge him to listen to the needs and concerns of my constituents and the representatives of the local area?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a battler for the people of Telford, as I've seen myself, and she does a great deal of good work for them. I can tell her that as a first step, my honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has called on the A&E at the Princess Royal Hospital to stay open as an A&E local, but has asked for the NHS to come forward with further proposals for better health care in Telford. But I will certainly be taking up her further points with him.
Elmore! Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The elderly and the vulnerable are more at risk from scamming than ever before, and Age UK has highlighted just this week that when the government's decision to scrap free TV licences for the over 75s will now put them at further risk of scamming, because they're now expecting fraudsters to go door to door collecting the licence fee once the government's decision has been implemented. Can the Prime Minister please prioritise the economic crime that scamming is, give the police the funding they need to investigate and prosecute these crimes, and reverse his decision to scrap the TV licences for over 75s?
Mr. Speaker, I must correct him on what he's just said about our decision. It is the BBC. No, on the contrary. And I was very clear. No, come on. I really think, honourable ladies and gentlemen, they should be clear about what's happening. It is up to the BBC to fund these licences. But on his point about scamming, I think he's being reasonable, and we will ensure that we do give people the protection and the security they need, not least through another 20,000 police officers on the streets of our country.
Order, given this widespread sadness that the very popular and respected member for Watford will be standing down at the next general election, it gives me great pleasure to call Mr. Richard Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it gives me great pleasure to be called, because as you have pointed out, this unfortunately may be my penultimate Prime Minister's questions, will unfortunately be your penultimate Prime Minister's questions, but I hope it will not be my right honourable friend the Prime Minister. I would like to ask my right honourable friend the Prime Minister if he's aware that for many people, many members like myself who voted for his bill last night but voted against the programme motion, we would be delighted to accept a reasonable compromise for the proper scrutiny of this bill, and this was not a vote for revocation in disguise.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can just thank my right honourable friend for his support, and I thought he was going to ask about the hospital in Watford, Mr. Speaker, which I'm delighted to say is going to be rebuilt along with many others across the country. And I congratulated him as a Conservative member then, and delighted that he's on all the work he's done for Watford. On the bill. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the House voted in favour of the bill. Unfortunately, as I say, they willed the end but not the means. The House of Commons has alas voted to delay Brexit again. We now must see what the EU says about that request for a delay, and I'll be studying their answer very closely to see how we proceed, Mr. Speaker.
From West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last football match. Will the Prime Minister congratulate the manager, Tom Lloyd-Zoo, for taking the players off, which is a very courageous decision? And can he explain to the House why bigotry has currently been emboldened under the current government?
Mr. Speaker, I was with the honourable lady who, until her last point, I certainly think that racism in football is utterly disgusting and should be stamped out at every possible opportunity. And she will have seen what happened in Bulgaria. I'm delighted to say that the head of the Bulgarian Football Association was dismissed from his position as a result of what happened in that match. We will certainly be making sure that we do everything we can to stamp out racism of any kind, wherever it takes place in this society, and whatever form it takes.
Connectivity across Angus is one of the most urgent issues, and I want to see full coverage of mobile rollout throughout my constituency. So I wholeheartedly support the Shared Rural Network Initiative, which is joint between the Government and the 4 main mobile providers, ensuring that we have masts in not-spot areas, but also reciprocal agreements between the operators to ensure that my constituents and constituents across the United Kingdom have that access. So will the Prime Minister assure me that he understands that connectivity is a top priority in Angus, and will he ensure that the funding that needs to get into this initiative to get it going will be given through the right channels?
Mr. Speaker, once again, the voice of Scotland, the voice of Angus. Thank you very much to my honourable friend. We are indeed engaged in levelling up not just the provision of gigabit broadband across the whole of the country, but also improving 4G mobile signal as well. It is our ambition, Mr. Speaker, to have 95% of the UK covered by 4G mobile signal. We've made changes to the regulations and the planning laws to make it easier for the infrastructure to be put in place. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, Mrs. Speaker, has just assured me that the honourable lady's particular request is going to be addressed.
Order. The Mayor of London has cut air pollution in central London by a third in the first 6 months of his ultra-low emission zone. Does the Prime Minister support the Mayor's plan to expand that zone? And does he still oppose the third runway at Heathrow that will reverse these gains?
He's going to lie in front of the...
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm as scandalised as the honourable gentleman about the failure of the Mayor of London to improve air quality, if that's what I understood him to just to say. When I was Mayor of London, Mr. Speaker, well, I just pick a period entirely at random. We cut NOx, we cut nitrous oxide emissions by I think 16%. We cut particulates by 20%, and I can tell him that this government has the most far-reaching ambitions of any society in the EU to improve air quality. And as for the Heathrow third runway, it remains the case that I have lively doubts about the ability of the promoters of that scheme, as I think he does, to meet standards of air quality and on noise emissions. And we will have to see how the courts adjudicate in that matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this House, we defend forever the right of peaceful protest. Yet on the 15th of August, and just 3 weeks ago, pro-Pakistani organisations held violent protests outside the Indian High Commission. This Sunday, there's the threat of 10,000 people being brought to demonstrate outside the Indian High Commission on Diwali, the most holy day for Hindus, Sikhs and Jains. What action is the government going to take to prevent violent protests this Sunday?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I join my honourable friend who speaks very strongly and well for his constituency in deploring demonstrations that end up being intimidating in any way at all. My honourable friend will understand this is a police operational matter, but I know that I'm just speaking to my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, and she will be raising it with the police. But we must all be clear. We must all be clear in this House that violence and intimidation anywhere is wholly unacceptable in this country.
Hi, Gamesbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Go on, Mike.
8 consultations on the millions of people are still caught by the Leasehold scandal. Yeah. At what stage is the Prime Minister and his government going to get a grip and end this feudal system once and for all?
Yeah.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman, and he raises something that is, I know, of great importance to all of our constituents, and we are delivering a very strong package of reforms. We will legislate to ban new leasehold houses and reduce future ground rents to zero. Reduce future ground rents to zero in all but exceptional circumstances, and we will close the legal loopholes that currently subject leaseholders to unacceptable costs. He raises a very important issue, and believe me, Mr. Speaker, we are on it right now.
Thank you much, Mr. Speaker. A toxic and carcinogenic bromate plume is threatening my constituency. There is plans to drill a new gravel quarry in Smallford which may disturb this plume and enter it into the watercourses. Can I ask his good officers to use influence with ministers to make sure the Environment Agency does not allow quarrying on this gravel pit until the bromate plume has been fully assessed on its toxicity?
I thank my honourable friend for raising that point about the toxic bromide plume. It reminds me of the various emanations that we sometimes hear from some parts of this House. I will get on immediately to the Environment Secretary and make sure that he takes it up in the way that she...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Women who face sexual abuse often stay silent and suffer alone. They blame themselves for the shame and guilt that they feel. They break down and cry alone because they feel no one will ever believe them, and they fear repercussions if they speak out. The fear of not being believed means brave women put on a smile and go about their daily lives, an example of which we heard from my colleague, the member for Canterbury. This very silence provides the perpetrators of that abuse the very get-out-of-jail card they need. Today, I ask the most powerful man in the United Kingdom one simple question. Does he agree with me that any woman who is subjected to sexual abuse of any kind should be believed, yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, I think she raises, if I may say, an absolutely crucial issue that I think many people in this country feel is not being sufficiently addressed, and that is one of the reasons why we've expanded the provision of independent domestic violence advisors, independent sexual abuse advisors, because I do think that every woman in this country who is a victim or a potential victim of domestic violence or sexual abuse should feel that she has the certainty of knowing that there is somewhere she can go, someone she can turn to for reassurance and support. It is absolutely vital as a society that we do that. And I would say also that I do not believe that as a country we are doing enough to bring rapists to justice. I think the level of successful prosecutions for the crime of rape is frankly inadequate, and I wish to raise that with the criminal justice system because I've looked at the numbers. They are not going in the right direction. Women must have the confidence that their crimes of domestic violence and sexual abuse are treated seriously by our law enforcement system.
Mr. Speaker, like me, I know the Prime Minister is a big supporter of Spaceport Cornwall, where we aim to be launching satellites into space from Europe's first horizontal spaceport by 2021. But in order to achieve this, we need government agencies to ensure that the contracts and regulations are in place. So will the Prime Minister use his offices to ensure that the UKSA and CAA have the resources they need and work at pace to make the most of this exciting opportunity?
Very good. Very good. Well, Mr. Speaker, I congratulate my honourable friend on what he's doing to promote the prospects of this new spaceport in Newquay that this government is constructing, and I think he's doing an excellent, outstanding job. And as he knows, Mr. Speaker, I think we all have a favourite candidate for the person who might be best placed to trial one of the new vessels that we propose to send into space. So if it's a horizontal spaceport, Mr. Speaker, I'm anxious it will take off at a horizontal trajectory, in which case, even if we were to recruit the right honourable gentleman opposite to be the first pilot, there is a risk he would end up somewhere else on the Earth. But maybe Venezuela would be a good destination.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am in favour of the EU single market. Hear, hear. I would vote for the EU single market.
Did you hear that?
Indeed, if the European Union didn't exist, we'd probably have to invent it.
Exactly.
Not my words, the Prime Minister. So let me ask him, what was it about the trappings of power that led him to abandon reason, embrace Brexit, and put so many jobs, so much trade, and so much prosperity at risk across these islands?
Mr. Speaker, as I think I said in the House on Saturday, there are clearly two schools of thought, two sides of the British psyche when it comes to the issue, and the House has been divided as the country has been divided. But I happen to think that we, after 47 years of EU membership, in the context of an intensifying federalist agenda in the EU, we have a chance now to make a difference about our national destiny and to seek a new and better future as a proud, independent, open, generous, global, free-trading economy. That is what we can do, Mr. Speaker. That is the opportunity that this country has, and I hope very much that he will support it and help us to deliver Brexit, deliver on the mandate of the people, and get it done by October the 31st.
Douglas Ross.
Mr. Speaker, last week saw the damaging US tariffs applied to many iconic murray products such as single malt Scotch whisky and shortbread. These industries had nothing to do with the dispute between the US and the EU, so what is the Government and the Prime Minister doing to try and get these tariffs removed as quickly as possible?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend campaigns valiantly on this issue. He's absolutely right, and both I and my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, have raised this matter personally with our counterparts in the United States. It is a rank injustice that Scottish whisky is being penalised in the way that it is, and we hope that those tariffs will be withdrawn as soon as possible. But it has been raised repeatedly at the highest level.
Finally, Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to associate myself and my colleagues from these benches with the remarks that have been made earlier about the horrific deaths of 39 people in Essex. Mr. Speaker, it is good manners to say thank you when our friends help us out. So would the Prime Minister like to express his gratitude to the 19 Labour MPs who voted for his deal last night, and to the Leader of the Opposition for meeting with him this morning to help push through his bad Brexit deal?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable lady for giving me that opportunity, and I do indeed express my gratitude. I think I did last night, and I'm happy to repeat again today, for the avoidance of doubt, to all members of the House who have so far joined the movement to get Brexit done and deliver on the mandate of the people. I don't think I can yet count her in that number. Perhaps I could ask her in return to cease her missions to Brussels, where she is, to the best of my knowledge, been asking for them not to give us a deal. I think that was a mistake. That was a mistake. They have given us an excellent deal, and I hope very much, in the cross-party spirit that she supports, that she will endorse that deal.
Order. No, I say to the honourable gentleman in all courtesy that points of order come later. I'm playing for time as members beetle out of the chamber before I call the Home Secretary, so I merely note en passant that there is a distinguished orthodontist observing our proceedings today, accompanied by his splendid wife. Very warm welcome to the House of Commons. Very good to see you. And momentarily, when members have completed their beetling out of the chamber quickly and quietly, we will be able to proceed with the statement by the Secretary of State for the Home Department. Statement, the Secretary of State for the Home Department, Secretary Priti Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the tragic discovery of 39 bodies in a shipping container in Essex this morning, I want to take this opportunity to update the House on the facts that are available so far. At 1:40 a.m. this morning, Essex police were alerted to an incident at the Waterglade Industrial Park, Eastern Avenue, Grays. At the scene, Essex police discovered a lorry container with 39 bodies inside. Early indications suggest that 38 of those found were adults and one teenager. From what police have been able to ascertain so far, is that the vehicle is believed to be from Bulgaria and entered the country at Holyhead, North Wales, one of the main port or ferries from Ireland, on the 19th of October. Essex Police, Mr. Speaker, have now launched a murder investigation. A 25-year-old man from Northern Ireland has been arrested on suspicion of murder. He remains in police custody as inquiries will now continue. I think the whole House will agree that this is a truly shocking incident. My thoughts and all thoughts and condolences are with the victims and their loved ones at this utterly terrible time. And I'm sure the whole House will also convey their condolences at this sad time. While the nationalities of the victims are not yet known, I have asked my officials to work closely with the investigation, providing all assistance we can in these horrific circumstances. This is on top of the joint working that's taking place already between the police, border force, immigration enforcement, the National Crime Agency and other law enforcement agencies to ascertain exactly how this incident occurred. Day in, day out, they work tirelessly to secure our borders against a wide range of threats, including people trafficking, and we will continue to work with international partners to keep people safe. Mr. Speaker, this is a tragic loss of life, and I and every one of my team will continue to update the House as more facts on this dreadful incident become known.
Diane Abbott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for early sight of her statement. Any death under these circumstances is truly appalling. The fact there have been 39 reported deaths in this incident is a terrible tragedy, one of the worst of its kind. And each of the 39 will have partners, family and friends who perhaps even now don't know how their loved one died and the horrible circumstances. So I'm sure I speak for the whole House when I say that our thoughts, prayers and wishes go out to the bereaved and all the loved ones of the victims. I would like to commend the emergency services for their work and also share with the member for Thurrock the horror that these emergency service workers will have seen sights that will live with them forever. It's important to remember that these 39 poor, unfortunate people are the victims in this. They are preyed on by the greedy, the unscrupulous, and people who simply have a willful disregard for the lives of others. But we should take account of the wider context. Nobody leaves their homes on a journey like this with so much risk and fear on a whim. They often do it because they are actually desperate. They can be the victims of economic privation, of war, famine, catastrophic climate change. There are many adverse conditions that people are fleeing from, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that these people are victims. I would also like an assurance from the Home Secretary that the cooperation with the EU27 on people trafficking, which is vital to make sure that these events don't happen in the future, that it will not actually become harder or imperiled because we're actually leaving the EU. I think it's important as well to raise the general conditions of refugees and asylum seekers. On this side of the House, we've long argued the government should establish safe and legal routes for genuine refugees to make their way here. If they do not, I fear there may be further tragedies like this. When one thinks about the events of this incident, when one thinks about how these people died, how terrifying their death must be, we should always remember when we're talking about migration, refugees and asylum, these people are people, and there is an obligation on us to make sure that where these people are moving legally, we do provide safe and legal routes.
Secretary.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her comments and her reflections following this tragic incident this morning. And she, of course, is right. There are a number of points that she has made in terms of our emergency service workers who are dealing with this whole incident on the ground. And, of course, we'll be working now collaboratively with part of the investigation teams, not just with Essex Police, but also with the National Crime Agency, Border Force and many others to look now to further this appalling investigation. I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, to just emphasise a few other points, because this is now a murder investigation. We are still ascertaining various facts. But I think in terms of the sheer humanity and the circumstances which we all find ourselves in, and following the deaths now of 39 individuals, that there are some fundamental points in terms of potential links to criminality, but also what we should be doing as a country in terms of making sure that we stand by those who really should not be trafficked in any way whatsoever. And as a country, we lead the world in many of our own ways of working internationally through modern-day slavery and through our own legislation too. But I think fundamentally, Mr. Speaker, there is always the point of international cooperation and collaboration. We must never lose sight of that. Whether, as the Right Honourable Lady has said, whether it's with our EU counterparts, but also our international counterparts as well, through many of the multilateral forums that we are working with to prevent upstream migration, to prevent illegal human trafficking, all the terrible things that we want to stop and prevent. But at the end of the day, do the right thing as a country as well to ensure that we uphold the right kind of values. So particularly those that are fleeing war zones, conflicts, some of the most horrendous situations that we see in the world, to ensure that we are able to give people asylum in the right kind of way, which is exactly what we do.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
And I thank my right honourable friend for her statement. I particularly like to thank for the offer that she's made to make her resources available to identify these people, because the fact of the matter is that the loved ones of these people have no idea of what's happened to them. They think their loved ones have gone to a better life, and that is an absolute tragedy. I should also say, sadly, this is not the first time that we've found people in metal containers in my constituency. I'm really sorry to say it's all too regular an occurrence, and it was only a matter of time before that would end in tragedy. And could I just endorse what my right honourable friend has said? This is now a multinational problem that we need to fix. We will not be able to stop people trafficking just from this country alone. This is something that really needs to be worked on with international partnerships to make sure we root these people who are making and profiting from people's hope and actually putting them into misery.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for her very considered remarks in light of what has happened in her constituency today. And I think also we should reflect upon the fact that this is not the first example of such a horrific incident in her own constituency. And she will know as well this was in an industrial park, actually, because she has thoughts as well that in previous equally horrific examples in the past too. And she is also right to reflect upon, she did to the Prime Minister earlier on, in terms of the work of the emergency workers, those that are on the scene, who will witness such horrors, and those will live with them probably for the rest of their lives, in fact. And we owe it to them, actually, to provide them the support that they need post this event. But there is a fundamental issue here. We as a government are naturally always committed to working with our law enforcement partners, with multinational agencies, to prevent all sorts of things of this nature ever materialising and happening. We are committed to breaking up criminal gangs. We do, of course, work upstream. We do, of course, work with our international partners. And I think, Mr. Speaker, if I could just highlight a few examples. Previous governments have committed, obviously, to legislation such as the Modern Day Slavery Act. In fact, our previous Prime Minister very much campaigned for that and secured that. But having myself worked within the international sphere, through my work in DFID, and obviously DFID themselves are doing a great deal now with upstream work, working through our multinational agencies, working with the United Nations and other organisations too. There is so much more that we can do internationally, because the fact of the matter is where there is global instability, where there's a great rate of displacement, we see such awful events like this happening.
Yes, MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I think we all share the same sense of shock and horror at this unspeakable tragedy and terrible crime. The thoughts and prayers of my part are certainly also with the victims and their families. We wish Essex Police and their partners Essex and bring to justice those who are culpable. But, Mr. Speaker, as a spokesperson for the Northern Ireland Freight Transport Association has pointed out, the route that this vehicle took in this case appears unorthodox. He raised the prospect that it is designed to avoid increased security at Dover and Calais. So as she ponders a response to this horrific event, the Home Secretary accepts the general point that focusing security and checks on one route is not going to work. Security and checks elsewhere are weaker. And most importantly of all, will she accept that sole focus and obsession almost on border securitisation will never stop desperate people using desperate means and routes to try to get here. In fact, such a focus simply means desperate people taking even more desperate and dangerous routes. And finally, will she accept that it's crucial that we are also generous in responding to this tragedy in the way that we provide safe legal routes for those with strong connections and ties to the UK, the very people who are most likely to risk their lives. Will she accept that there is much more this country can do to provide such safe legal routes through schemes like Dublin, family reunion, relocation and resettlement?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his remarks and the questions that he's posed too. I'm sure he will recognise, as will the whole House, that obviously the United Kingdom is very proud of its record when it comes to a lot of the work on national resettlement schemes. And clearly he's alluded to principles such as Dublin as well, where we do support resettlement. And that is absolutely the right principles that we as a nation stand by. And nobody would doubt that or question that at all. I think when it comes to obviously the route through which the potential lorry came through and specific to his remarks as well, I think it is important, Mr. Speaker, to reflect upon the fact that, across all avenues, all entries through our ports and airports, in fact, obviously the UK operates intelligence-led controls. We have border force, obviously doing checks at every single level. But the fundamental principle here that we cannot ignore is the fact of the matter is we are dealing with those that are using people for the most appalling purposes. And what we have seen today and what we are witnessing is one of the most horrendous crimes against humanity and crimes against individuals. And that's why I think as we don't know the full facts, we don't have the full details behind what is going on, we must give the police and other agencies the space to investigate what has happened and then obviously look at what more we can do to prevent incidents like this from happening again.
Green. My right honourable friend will be aware that words are barely available to cover the full horror of this. But she'd also be aware, to pick up one of the points just made, that most of the effort of Border Force in terms of combating the disgusting and murderous crime of people trafficking have been concentrated on the Channel ports and on unorthodox, non-official transport across Channel. Can she reassure the House that Border Force will be able to spread its efforts to cover not just Holyhead, as in this case, but also other ports around the country where if lorries are coming in regularly, clearly this disgusting trade could take place, because it is going to require the defence of the whole United Kingdom if we're going to be successful in saving lives in the future.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and we have just seen today one example, one incident, a horrible, horrific incident in Essex. But of course, my right honourable friend has also just alluded to other examples, small boats, for example, coming through Kent, coming through Dover, and there has been a great deal of work that has taken place in preventing people trafficking through those particular routes. But he is right, and in answer to his questions, absolutely, we are committed not just with Border Force, but with our other agencies, through our intelligence network as well, to work far more collaboratively to ensure that, yes, we can ensure that all ports are prepared while our staff are looking out for some of the most appalling behaviours, some of the examples that we're now speaking about today in the House, but importantly that we do more collectively as a government to work with our international partners to stop this from happening in the first place.
Given the importance of Holyhead, I thought first was Albert Lewin. I'm shocked and saddened at this incident and the appalling loss of life, and my thoughts go out to the families of those 39 victims. The Secretary of State mentioned the port of Holyhead, the busiest seaport of the Republic of Ireland. And on October the 19th, the alleged lorry came through the port of Holyhead. Can she tell the House, I know it's early days, but how many checks were made on lorries to the port of Holyhead on that day? It's important, because I know the important work that multi agencies do on people trafficking and drug trafficking through that very important port.
Honourable friend raises a very, very important point. I cannot tell the House right now that information. That is subject to, obviously, the investigation. I will, of course, come back to him directly myself as this investigation unfolds with the specific information that he has asked for. But I can assure him that, of course, everything will be done in terms of checks coming through Holyhead.
Andrew Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, both front benches and my honourable friend Paul Thurrock have spoken for the entire country at this horrific event. But isn't one of the most specific lessons that existing international conventions simply don't work anymore because of events of recent years? We've seen this in the Mediterranean, off the coast of Libya, as well as in the Channel and through events like today. This is what the modern equivalent of the slave trader is perpetrating. So will she use her past experience, along with other members of the government, to try and persuade the United Nations to modernise and introduce a new convention, which will be hopefully more fit for purpose and avoid these terrible events happening in the future?
My right honourable friend raises such an important point, and he speaks with great experience and insight and knowledge on this issue. And he is right that as the world has changed, conflict has changed. We are seeing all sorts of desperate situations around the world, and there is much more that we can do in terms of leveraging our own voice and our own influence with organisations such as the United Nations. So there is no doubt that there is much more that can be done, and he will also be very familiar with the UN Migration Compact, which I think came about in around 2015, where great work, in fact the United Kingdom stood up and spoke very, very convincingly to do much more in this space. But I think he's absolutely right, there is much more that we can do internationally.
Thank the Home Secretary for her statement. It's really unbearable to imagine people losing their lives in this awful way. And whilst we obviously cannot preempt the investigation, she's right to say that people trafficking is one of the most vile crimes that there is. People are profiting from putting other people's lives at risk and from other people's desperation. Could she tell the House what engagement is taking place with the Irish police and also with the Bulgarian police and with the European Migrant Smuggling Centre to make sure that there is full international cooperation into this awful crime, to make sure that more lives are not put at risk?
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her comments. She will appreciate that this is now a murder investigation. So as a result, all avenues of inquiry and collaboration are now underway. So I will report back to the House in due course and directly to the Right Honourable Lady too, once we are able to share much more specific information. Because this is highly sensitive, because this is now a live investigation. But as I said, all collaboration is now taking place.
Mr. Speaker, can I echo the words of my honourable friend, the member for Thurrock, and obviously my neighbour as well, and express my own shock and horror at the loss of 39 poor souls. Can I also pay tribute to all the emergency services, but also to local authority officers who I know are involved in dealing with this in a very, very professional way in very difficult circumstances. Will my right honourable friend commit to supplying them with all necessary resources to be able to conduct their investigations and deal with the situation as speedily and as effectively as possible?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, his comments and the points that he's raised. He's absolutely right. Our emergency services are obviously under great strain in dealing with this. This is an absolutely horrendous incident. But at the same time, our local authorities and our emergency services will be coming together with Essex Police and others to be supported. And as I said in my statement earlier on, we will provide all the necessary support that is required to not just obviously deal with the murder investigations, provide the support that's needed there, to actually help on the ground, because obviously this is a very, very deeply traumatising time. It's complicated because other agencies are involved, and now, of course, this is a murder investigation too.
Christine Jardine.
Mr. Speaker, I share the horror and sadness at the news of these deaths, which is unimaginable what the individuals concerned must have gone through. And while I welcome the Secretary of State's comments about more international action and recognising the need for safe legal routes to sanctuary, would she also agree with me that we have to look at our own immigration system and repair it to ensure that what we provide is fair, compassionate and effective for those who want to come here?
Thank the Honourable Lady for her comments about what has happened. I think today is actually not the place to be talking about an immigration system at all. We have migration challenges that we are seeing around the world. People are being displaced in record numbers, and many are being displaced and preyed upon through some of the most appalling behaviours through criminal gangs and organised gangs. So I think at this particular stage, we want to, and it's right that as a country we work with all our partners, both domestically and internationally, as well as law enforcement agencies, to do our utmost to stop this horrific crime.
Yes, the sound was quite melodic. It was still disorderly. Mr. Penny.
Mr. Speaker, I had the pleasure as a firefighter serving at the old fire station in Hog Lane in Grace. And when the firefighters and other emergency crews went on duty last night, never in their wildest dreams would they have expected to witness the sort of trauma that they saw when that container was opened. It won't just be the emergency services, it will be the local authority workers, and even the mortuary attendant would never ever have seen that sort of destruction of life coming through. So can I ask the Home Secretary, not just for now, but going forward, that all the support in post-traumatic stress is there for them, because it doesn't always show straight away, sometimes months and years ahead, as I've experienced with my colleagues already.
Thank my right honourable friend for his remarks, and he speaks with great personal insight and experience about this, and he is absolutely right. The trauma of even being part of a recovery and emergency service following an incident like this will just be shattering for all individuals that are involved. And there is a very important point here, Mr. Speaker, that I think for anyone that works in a frontline service, an emergency service, when an incident like this happens, and other incidences too, where people are involved, where life-saving is involved, it is a fact that trauma comes back to people later on, post-traumatic stress, and therefore we not just will be investing, but ensuring that we're supporting those very individuals that are really just doing so much work locally today.
David Hanson.
Acts, Mr. Speaker, of unconscionable criminality organised by gangs across Europe. I just want to ask the Home Secretary whether she has approached Europol, which we are still a member, and who have at their heart planned for 3 years to tackle criminality in gangs and cooperation across Europe to track down the perpetrators of this type of crime.
Say to my humble friend that we always work, I mean this is now murder investigation, so this is a live investigation, so all agencies will be activated in terms of sharing information and working together. But I think the additional point to make as well is the one that he's raised too. There is a degree of organised criminality here, and whether it's in Europe or whether it's outside of Europe, we will always stand firm against this and make sure that we collaborate with all our partners.
Sarah Newton.
Mr. Speaker, these international, serious and organised crime gangs who are trading in weapons and drugs and humans are ruthless. And we need to be as ruthless in our prosecution of these people. We have to end this wicked trade in human misery. And I saw firsthand the huge efforts in the Home Office working with our international partners across Europe to tackle this issue. But could I ask her to redouble our efforts in those countries like Bulgaria, like Romania, where so many people are coerced or bribed or persuaded to participate in this human trafficking to prevent them from doing it?
I thank my honourable friend for her comments and her reflections, and she will know from her own work previously as well in this area, and she's right, she speaks with a great deal of experience in terms of what goes on in other countries, in terms of criminality, coercion, putting pressure on people, and just the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. We want that to stop. We will continue to work collaboratively, she's absolutely right. But also, the way in which we do this is to have the right kind of terrorists in places, and to also ensure that we can prosecute through the criminal justice system.
For those who missed the announcement yesterday, I advised colleagues of a notable event, namely the re-election of the Honourable Gentleman Member for Gateshead as Chair of the Backbench Business Committee, a role he has discharged with consummate skill for a number of years now. More particularly, the Honourable Gentleman is a most extraordinary specimen in this place, in that he has secured re-election unopposed, which is a commentary upon the esteem in which he is held. He emerged even more grateful than usual, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, in my constituency of Gateshead, the bulk of the face-to-face casework that I do is with refugees and asylum seekers. And with that in mind, I'm very mindful that we need to establish the identities of these victims as quickly as we possibly can. We need to identify their identities and their points of origin, because many of the victims may well have relatives and friends who are already here in this country and settled all around this country. They are our constituents. And we need to think about what we're going to do to assist those people when they discover the dreadful fate of their loved ones who've died in this container today. But we also, with our international hat on, need to think about what we're going to do as a country to assist the families and relatives of those victims back in those points of origin, because those people won't know that their loved ones are dead. And they'll think they've gone off to a better life in Britain, only to find that they've died dreadfully in the back of a steel box in Grays in Essex.
I'd like to thank the honourable gentleman for his considered remarks and also congratulate him on his election. I think there are a number of points here. As there is a live investigation, it is right that we focus on identifying the country of origin of the victims of what has happened, this horrendous crime. I think it's fair to say all members of the House need to come together and actually work together, and I'm very happy to assist any member, honourable member, if there are family connections in their own constituencies, and this isn't just from a case management perspective. We have to look at this in terms of the impact upon them, and then they themselves may also be part of the lines of inquiry in terms of the routes through which people were coming through as well. We do need to look at the international routes, definitely, but I think at the same time right now we've got to give the police the space to do their investigation, and then I will of course pick up with every single honourable member should there be anything specific to their own constituency that materialises.
Finding those responsible and bringing them to justice will be a priority for our police, our border agencies, and I'm sure the Home Secretary, my right honourable friend. Can I urge her to make sure that the police and the Criminal Prosecution Service use the full force of the law that this government has put into place to tackle modern slavery, particularly the freezing of assets of those who could be involved at an early stage, so that they're not able to squirrel away their criminal funds from such a murderous activity.
My right honourable friend is absolutely correct about this, and if I may say so, Mr. Speaker, there have been cases recently where we've seen exactly that take place, and rightly so. Criminality must be pursued, it must be prosecuted, we must use every single lever of law enforcement as well to confiscate funds and assets of these individuals, and I do know recently that has happened in other cases. But she is right. We as a country, through our own legislation, we have levers. We have the ability to send out a very strong signal internationally. We must do more of that.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the Home Secretary's comments and the tone in which she's spoken? We're all horrified by what has happened. Can I also stress the importance of international cooperation and just ask the Home Secretary whether she can make herself aware of the work that was going on in the Council of Europe, led by the Foreign Secretary, to try and improve concerted action to tackle human trafficking right across the whole of the Council of Europe member states and beyond.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about this, and I'd like to thank him as well for the work that he has undertaken through the APPG, modern slavery and human trafficking. And again, I think he's a very good example of how that collaboration can take place, not just in this House, but across other organisations too. Yes, in the Council of Europe, yes, across government and multilaterally as well, multinationally. We must pursue that, because as we are seeing and witnessing and experiencing right now, one case is too many, but when we have 39 people who have died in our own country through such awful means, that is not acceptable. So we have to do much more to work together to stop that from happening.
Mary Robinson.
Instant and an appalling loss of life. Whilst the emergency vehicle appears to have begun its journey in Bulgaria, there's less clarity as to where the victims themselves began their dreadful journey towards death. Could the Minister confirm with me that she's working with international agencies as well as using the forces here and the immigration forces in order to ascertain where these people began the journey so they can make that contact with their families and loved ones?
My friend is absolutely right. She raised this point, and this is now an active line of inquiry now that this is a full-on murder investigation. I do want to emphasise, of course, because this investigation is obviously being led by Essex Police. They are working with other agencies, including the National Crime Agency, and of course they will be able to determine the identities of country of origin first and foremost. But I do also just want to pay tribute to Essex Police for the leadership they have given on this as well. In what is an incredibly challenging investigation and just a dreadful scenario that, quite frankly, any police force would find deeply challenging.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for the tone as well as the content of what she said. And I'd like to press her further on international cooperation. She rightly praises the work of the Council of Europe and the cross-party, cross-national cooperation to expand refugee resettlement and other forms of safe and legal routes. I wonder if I could ask her if she thinks it would be a good idea for us to expand that still further so that we can increase the very low number of countries worldwide, only 27, who take refugees on the resettlement route via the UN, which is a safe and legal route that we have much to offer. We do very well. What will she do to help increase that with other countries?
The young lady for her comments, and as I've said already, and she has recognised in her remarks, we lead the way, and we have led other countries through multinational forums, through much of our engagement, through migration compacts as well. It's pretty clear that there is more that can be done, and the United Kingdom, the British government, working with our counterparts, will continue to do that, because when we live in such an unstable world, when we see the biggest displacement of people, more people on the move since the Second World War, through terror, through conflict, through just some of the awful scenes that we see in the news every single day, it's pretty clear that actually we can lead others, and we have great skill and great experience in doing that.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This instance is beyond horrific, and can I thank the Member of Parliament for Thurrock, who I think has spoken for all the people of Essex today. And as an Essex MP, I'm particularly thinking of the Essex Police. And I know, Madam Deputy Speaker, you will have seen how our police services and emergency services in Essex go out day after day, night after night, on the front line to keep the rest of us safe. And can I thank the number of Essex MPs in the chamber today, and of course the Home Secretary herself. And can I thank her for giving that reassurance that our emergency services will get the support, both short-term and long-term, for all their needs? Can she also give us the reassurance that no matter what happens in the coming days over Brexit, we in the UK will continue to work with police forces across Europe, with agencies such as Europol and Interpol, to make sure that crimes like this don't happen again?
I thank my honourable friend for her considered and thoughtful remarks, and she's right. As you know, I think all MPs in the House will feel a great deal of strength and solidarity with Essex Police as they undertake this investigation today. I think our police do a remarkable service. They do remarkable work, and clearly, police forces in Essex, the police force in Essex, Chief Constable of Essex, BJ Harrington, and his team will be dealing with this in the right way in very challenging circumstances. But my honourable friend is absolutely right in terms of our continued work with agencies across the European Union. That work is always ongoing. That is part of our way of working, part of our international collaboration. That will not change. And of course, there's one other point to make about that collaboration. We work collaboratively to keep our country safe. We can also do more to work collaboratively to make sure that those who perpetrate these awful crimes are brought to justice.
Ian Paisley. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Give us a visual scale. There's approximately 39 to 40 members sitting on this side of the House. And I think that just gives us something to measure this man in terms of the sheer loss and devastation that has been created. Without prejudice to the investigations that the Home Secretary has announced today, will she be able to look further into paramilitary and organised crime in Northern Ireland that uses these unauthorised and illegitimate transport and trade links to carry out their own horrible and despicable crimes, and see what additional measures need to be placed both on our own existing border in Northern Ireland and in cooperation with the Garda Síochána on their ports in the Republic.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions and his comments as well regarding what has happened today. I think there are a number of points to make. First and foremost, clearly there is a police investigation specifically taking place with regards to what has happened in Essex today. He is right to point out about criminality. And the point is, we work collaboratively across all our agencies. Obviously, I've already mentioned the National Crime Agency. There are others, there are many other police forces as well. PSNI obviously are a key partner to work with too. And we will continue to look at all avenues to make sure that we can stop this criminality from happening, that we can stop this criminality from flourishing, but also that we can bring the perpetrators of criminality to justice.
Alex Chalk. Deputy Speaker, TRIM, or Trauma Risk Management, is a protocol adopted by Gloucestershire Police to provide swift support to police officers who may have witnessed deeply traumatic episodes. As part of the support that Essex Police are giving to their officers, can she assure me that if they need to reach out to other police forces for additional advice, assistance and resources, they do not hesitate to do so? Gloucestershire Police will be on hand to help.
Well, let me thank my honourable friend and thank Gloucestershire Police as well for that offer of support. He's right to point out about trauma management because all police forces provide a form of trauma management as well. But I will absolutely pick that up with the Chief Constable of Essex myself to ensure that all officers who are involved in this investigation of this case are supported in the right way. And if we do need to go elsewhere to work collaboratively with another police force, then we will certainly do so.
Anna Soubry. Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Lay, Right Honourable Lay, clearly expressed, I think, the nation's concern and horror at what has happened. It's a terrible tragedy. Of course, there is a continuing an investigation being conducted by the police, so we shouldn't speculate, but I think we are all entitled to reach a number of conclusions as to what's happened. And it's not the first time that it has happened, and we must be absolutely sure that we do everything we can to make sure it's the last time. We all strongly suspect that this will be an international operation that won't just be confined to the European continent. It may well go well beyond, and it will require a huge and complex investigation. And undoubtedly there will be a very long, complex chain of criminality that has resulted in this terrible incident. So can the Home Secretary give us an assurance that all the agencies in this country will have all the resources that they need to do a full and proper investigation, bring those people to justice, and hopefully it will be the last time?
Right honourable lady, and she is absolutely right. I mean, the focus of my comments have been very much upon that collaboration across all agencies, but other countries too, where other agencies are based. And I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the points that I should make and refer to is it's not just the agencies based in the UK, but other international agencies. Our level of collaboration is first class, and that is something where we will bring that skill set together and, of course, ensure that all the resources are in place so that we can absolutely bring the perpetrators to justice, but importantly, stand up for those victims who have lost their lives through this incident.
Gareth Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This was clearly an awful tragedy. The people that were in that container would have endured an unimaginable experience. It also would have had a profound impact on the emergency services who attended the scene in the early hours of this morning. So can I echo the comments of a number of members in the chamber today that they need to be given the support that's available and necessary. No amount of training can prepare an emergency worker for this experience, and I know that the Home Secretary cares deeply about the people of Essex and its emergency services, so can she commit to ensuring that support is given